Did you know that Gandalf was a ring bearer? Not just any ring bearer, but he bore one of the 3 elven rings of power, which were hidden from Sauron himself. Regular viewers of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings might not have known this little fact, but it greatly impacts the way that Gandalf interacts with Middle-earth throughout the trilogy, and even his time before the story of the Lord of the Rings takes place. In today's video, we're going to do a deep dive on the history and lore of Narya, the Ring of Fire. We will uncover its origin, its original owner, how Gandalf came to own one of the Elven rings, as he himself is not one of the Eldar, and finally, how it impacted Middle-earth during the time of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So let's begin by taking a brief look at the origin of the 3 Elven rings. Forged by Celebrimbor in the Second Age 1590, the 3 rings of power were created after Sauron had departed from Eregion. Eregion was one of the settlements of the Noldor where Celebrimbor lived. Sauron had disguised himself as an emissary of the Valar and called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He had attempted to group up with Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, and Elrond, but was turned away due to their suspicion of his motives. However, the Elven settlement of Eregion was deceived, and Celebrimbor, a master smith of the elves, assisted Sauron in the making of 16 rings of power that were initially all meant for the elves. But after his true intentions were found out, Sauron left the area and went to Mordor to forge the One Ring. After the forging of the One Ring using the Black Speech of Mordor, the elves who bore the 16 rings of power realized Sauron's plans and immediately took off their rings. But Celebrimbor secretly forged 3 elven rings of power using the knowledge that he gained from Sauron. However, when Sauron laid siege to Eregion, he captured the 9 rings and then tortured Celebrimbor to reveal the whereabouts of the other 7. These 16 rings he gave to men and dwarves. But Celebrimbor never revealed where he sent the 3 elven rings of power, even though he was tortured to the point of death. According to parts of Tolkien's lore, we know that the recipients of the 3 elven rings were Galadriel of Lothlorien, Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, and Círdan, a shipwright and highly respected elf who was known for his wisdom and foresight. It is said that during the last alliance of men and elves, while they were fighting Sauron, the 3 ring bearers did not wear these 3 elven rings, as they knew that they were backdoors into Sauron's mind, and although they could see his mind, he could also see them. So they did not wear them until the ring was officially lost and Sauron was thought to be defeated. We know what happened to the men, but the story of what happened to the Dwarf Lords is quite interesting, and I might save that for another video. As for the 3 elven rings, let's discuss what each one was and which ring Gandalf came to be the keeper of. The first ring, which came to Galadriel, was named Narya, the Ring of Water, the White Ring, and the Ring of Adamant. The ring was made of mithril and set with a white stone. Narya's power was preservation and protection, which Galadriel used to sustain Lothlorien, and it is part of the reason why it almost sits outside of Sauron's reach and power during the time of the Lord of the Rings. The second ring, which was owned by Gil-galad, was Vilya, the Ring of Air, the Blue Ring, and the Dominant Ring. The exact powers of the ring are unknown, but like the other 2, they possess preservative powers and potential healing, as we hear that Elrond is one of the greatest healers of the elves. Elrond eventually came to own the ring after Gil-galad died during battle in the War of the Last Alliance. Lastly, we come to Narya, the Ring of Fire, the Red Ring. According to some accounts, Gil-galad received both Vilya and Narya, and after his death, Narya went to Círdan, while other accounts say that Celebrimbor sent the ring to Círdan immediately. Regardless, Círdan the shipwright became the keeper of the ring, and he was one of the greatest of the elves. Círdan was a master of the Grey Havens and saw to the departure of the elves from Middle-earth. Narya's power was to inspire and resist domination, tyranny, and despair, and Círdan kept the ring safe for nearly 1,000 years after Gil-galad's death and the assumed defeat of Sauron. You might be thinking at this point, this is all great history and lore, but how did Gandalf come to own this ring? Well, around the Third Age, 1050, a darkness began to creep upon Middle-earth, and the Valar sent the Astari as protectors of Middle-earth, although they came disguised to all the inhabitants of the land. We know the Astari as the Wizards of Middle-earth: Saruman, Radagast, the Blue Wizards, and Gandalf, each having a color that represented their purpose and role in the group. Upon Gandalf's arrival to Middle-earth, Círdan, with his foresight and wisdom, saw far into Gandalf's future and realized what he really was. He gifted the ring Narya to Gandalf as he believed that he would have more use for it and be a better keeper of it. When giving it to Gandalf, he said, "Take now this ring, for thy labors and thy cares will be heavy, but in all it will support thee and defend thee from weariness. For this is the Ring of Fire, and herewith maybe thou shalt rekindle hearts to the valor of old in a world that grows chill." Later, after the One Ring was destroyed, Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, Frodo, and Bilbo depart from the Grey Havens, and Círdan stays a little longer to watch over things, and then finally in the Fourth Age, Círdan departs from the shores of Middle-earth with Celeborn. Before we jump into the impact that the ring had on Middle-earth while Gandalf bore it, let me quickly address a question that you're probably thinking right now. If Gandalf had the ring the whole time, why didn't we see it in the movies? Well, there's a little trick with the 3 elven rings. The owners of the rings were able to make them invisible to the outside world if they wanted, but naturally when the ruling ring was destroyed, the 3 elven rings lost the ability to do this, which is why in the last part of the movie, when Frodo and Gandalf are at the Grey Havens, you can clearly see Gandalf wearing a ring with a red gem. While Frodo is in Lothlorien, he sees the ring of Galadriel, because as she tells him, his sight has grown keener since bearing the One Ring of Sauron. She asks Sam, who is with him, if he can see her ring, and Sam says that all he sees is a star on her finger, but not a ring. It is only at this point that Frodo's eyes had grown keen enough to perceive the 3 elven rings, and at this point, Gandalf had been lost in Moria, and Frodo does not see him again until after the One Ring is destroyed. This explains why Frodo never knows that Gandalf is a keeper of one of the 3 rings of power. Anyway, now that we know the history of the 3 rings of power and how Gandalf came to be a ring bearer, let's discuss the impact that this had on Frodo's journey in the battle for Middle-earth. You see, the rings of power aren't like a superhero's powers. It's not like Green Lantern just creating a big fist to punch things. The rings more so represent feelings, emotions, and harness the natural law of the universe, for good or for evil. Gandalf's ring of power, Narya, specifically was said to have the power to resist evil and was the ring of fire, which is why Círdan hoped that Gandalf could use it to kindle the hearts of the people of Middle-earth. Because for centuries, a darkness and complacency had grown throughout the lands as Sauron regained his strength. But in order to really recognize the influence that the ring had on Middle-earth, we need to take a deeper look into Gandalf's role as an Astari. You see, the movies showcase a little of Gandalf's travels, but the books dive deeper into his lore and enigmatic personality. For thousands of years, Gandalf traveled all throughout Middle-earth, being a helper and counselor to those in need. He meddled in the ways of men, elves, dwarves, and hobbits. In fact, because of his purpose, he was one of the only people in the whole world who knew about the race of hobbits. His job was to stick his nose in places it didn't belong and offer help and guidance. This eventually led to him growing a name for himself among multiple people groups. He was known as Mithrandir to the elves, Gandalf to the hobbits, Stormcrow to the men of Rohan, and Tharkun among the dwarves. He was a mythical figure that each people group had stories and lore about that was passed from generation to generation. A man who never aged and always seemed to pop up around the time of need to offer advice and counsel. And an underlying theme in everything he participated in was how every people group he helped felt hope and determination to ward off whatever evil they faced. And while a lot of this is inherent to the power that Gandalf was already equipped with when he came to Middle-earth, he was bolstered by his Ring of Power. Let's take a look at a prime example of this. During the Return of the King, Gandalf heads to Minas Tirith with Pippin to be on the front lines of the war against Mordor and await the arrival of Aragorn. As the battle is being waged, it seems as though all the people of the city have given up hope. Boromir, one of their top leaders, has died, Faramir is on the brink of death, and the Steward of Gondor, Lord Denethor, is making some of the worst strategic decisions ever. Talk about family issues. But as Gandalf rides through the city, wearing Narya, it says that he inspired hope and courage in every man he passed. This is a clear example of the work of a Ring of Power, as like I said previously, it doesn't act like a superpower, but controls some of the fabric of the universe itself, like the feelings of hope and courage. The ability to resist the evil of Sauron and fight for good comes from the ring. Another example is Gandalf's fight with the Balrog. In the films, when he says, "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor," he seems to be indicating that he is a ring bearer of Narya, the Ring of Fire, which helps him to be immune to some of the power of the Balrog. Ultimately, we can thank Círdan for having the foresight to gift the ring to Gandalf, as he is the perfect owner for this ring. He already was going throughout Middle-earth to help the people fight against darkness, and so to have a ring that is empowered and helps those around it resist evil pretty much goes hand in hand with Gandalf. Although we don't see it outright on his finger in the trilogy, and he doesn't reveal his secret power to those around him, it had a massive influence on his actions and abilities throughout the story. His own power as an Astari is limited by the Valar, but having a Ring of Power helped him and the peoples of Middle-earth to defeat Sauron and enter the Fourth Age. If you noticed anything I missed or have comments regarding this ring and Gandalf's use of it, make sure to comment below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more awesome deep dives into Tolkien and Middle-earth lore on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.